Hi, I'm Rolf Burrows with Shooter's Paradise. We recently made a video speaking about when you should stop using force. Very important concept. In that video, we talked about the case of Tony McBride. I'll highlight that quickly. Tony McBride's a law enforcement officer in LA who is also a competitive shooter, has a high degree of skill. A man with a knife came toward her. She gave verbal commands. They were not followed. She fired 2 shots. The guy went down on the ground, tried to get back up. She fired another 2 shots, and then he was down on the ground. Apparently, best of my information, she fired 2 final shots while he was down on the ground. This is still being worked out, this case here. The LA Police Commission has stated that her final 2 shots were not justified. So at this point, she potentially faces prosecution criminally for a homicide charge. She faces life in prison for murder. Just crazy, crazy, crazy. We have to be very careful that our use of force stops when somebody stops trying to kill us. That is critically important. Another case that I wanted to dive into with you was Officer Jason Van Dyke. Jason Van Dyke shot Laquan McDonald. Laquan McDonald was a young man who had a knife. Apparently there was a call and police responded to an individual with a knife. He was not cooperative. Apparently he had been given a lot of commands that he refused to follow. Interestingly, he used the knife to stab a tire on one of the police cruisers and also damaged a windshield on a police cruiser. So he was not just standing there with the knife. He actively used the knife to do things. That doesn't bode well. So I don't know if the first shots that Officer Van Dyke took were ideally justified or would not have been justified ideally. I don't know that. I wouldn't make a judgment about that. He was the only officer to fire, and there were other officers there, and that's an interesting point. But here's what he did do that I can make definite statements about. He continued to fire shots until he had emptied his firearm. He fired 16 shots, and he took 13 seconds to do so. Any one of you out there who does some shooting on a timer will know that a second a shot cadence is slow shooting. That's bang, 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 bang. That's not fast shooting. That's not bang, 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 bang. Huge difference. So a second between shots gives us time to make evaluations between firing. He fired till his gun was empty. So, what can we look at in that regard? Well, the young man apparently, based on the charges and how the case was handled afterwards, apparently the young man was down and out very quickly. Maybe in the very beginning, maybe at the first shot or 2, he was down and out. An important concept is if somebody's down and they have a knife, and I've put them on the ground, they're going to have a hard time hurting me with that knife from that position down there. If they're down and they have a gun in their hand, they can still kill me. So that's a different dynamic. We often see these shooting too much or shooting too long cases involve knives, because a knife is a contact weapon, and if the guy is flat on the ground, he cannot get to you unless he can get up. And so in the Tony McBride shooting, we see the guy was getting up and she fired 2 shots and those were justified. So if he's down and out on the ground, we cannot keep firing. And that's exactly what Officer Jason Van Dyke did. He kept shooting slowly, a slow cadence of shots, and he fired until the gun was empty, 16 rounds. If the guy was not doing anything, then that is clearly excessive. There would have to be some kind of serious extenuating circumstance to make that not excessive. And that's what the prosecution, the DA, and everybody, and the jury all felt. They agreed with the same thing. He was convicted of second-degree murder and 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm. And those 16 counts, of course, were for each shot. So the charges that were brought against him were none of his shooting was justified. It's possible, in an ideal world, looking at things properly, it may be his first shot or two could have been justified. Take that, set that off to the side. But certainly the last 5, the last 8, the last 10 shots, certainly at a second per round, that is not justified. Had he shot once or twice and stopped, there could have been a completely different outcome. It could be, not saying it should or would, but it could be that would have been found to have been justified action. But firing 16 in 13 seconds, there's just no way. With the guy's got a knife, he goes down quickly and he's out. That's just crazy. So that's a case where the use of force went way too long. Just extreme. That's an extreme case if it went way too long. Then we have another case that I wanted to look at. This is a citizen, Jacksonville, Florida, Michael Dunn. This is an interesting case. So there were 4, I would say, young men sitting in a car outside of a convenience store playing music, enjoying their music, and it was very loud. Michael Dunn pulls up into a parking space beside them at the convenience store, and his lady friend gets out to go inside the convenience store and get a bottle of wine and some chips. Michael Dunn was in Jacksonville to attend a wedding, if I remember correctly. So in this case, Michael Dunn was not happy about the loud music. And after his lady friend was inside the convenience store, there was some discussion back and forth between Michael Dunn and the youths in the other vehicle about turning down the music. And they did. And then Jordan Davis, who was sitting in the back seat on the side closest to Michael Dunn, told them they should turn the music back up. And there began a conflict there. And the end result of that little conflict was that Michael Dunn reached into the glove box, pulled out a pistol, and fired 3 rounds. I believe all 3 of those first 3 rounds hit Jordan Davis. Then they started to move their vehicle because they were getting shot at. The driver threw it in reverse and stepped on the gas. As the vehicle started to move, Michael Dunn was getting out of his car, and he assumed a shooting position and fired 4 shots. Apparently none of those shots produced lethal results. Then the vehicle that held the 4 young men was leaving the parking lot when Michael Dunn, 6 seconds later, so he fires 3, gets out of the vehicle, fires 4. Then there is a pause of 6 full seconds, and the vehicle with the young men is leaving the parking lot. He fired 3 additional shots. Again, those 3 apparently did not have any lethal effect. So, the vehicle is out of the parking lot and gone. Michael Dunn's lady friend comes out, gets in the car. They go back to their hotel, order pizza, get up the next morning, and drive home to Satellite Beach. And it's only in Satellite Beach when a witness notices his license plate matches what the police are looking for that he gets arrested in Satellite Beach. Now, an interesting twist on the case, why we should always call the police if we've had to use force, is Michael Dunn claimed there was what he believed was a shotgun in Jordan Davis's hands. And he asked the police, what about the shotgun? Well, they had no knowledge of it, and they didn't know to search for it. So when the youths had left the convenience store, they stopped. Their friend was dying, and he did. Jordan Davis died in the end. Their friend was dying. They called the police. Had there been a shotgun, they may have hidden it. Had the police known to look for the shotgun, they may have found it if it existed. But because Michael Dunn did not tell them, did not report it, that potential piece of evidence, which could have saved his bacon, could have, possibly, was not there. It was not to be found. So now it becomes just some unsubstantiated allegation he made, which is what all criminals do. Oh, he had a knife. Well, we found no knife. Well, he had a knife. Yeah, well, without some evidence, then we don't have any backing for that claim. So in his case, he was charged, taken to court, tried. There were three attempted murder charges and one first-degree murder charge in his first trial. In that first trial, the jury found him guilty of 3 attempted murder charges. And then they had a mistrial on the 4th charge, and he was retried later on that first-degree murder charge. So the interesting thing is here, the 3 shots that he took after the 6-second break in action, when the vehicle was exiting the parking lot and he fired at the vehicle, those 3 shots represented 3 attempted murder charges. Had he simply stopped firing the first 3 shots and the vehicle backs up and he takes no others, it's entirely possible that may have been found justified. Those first 3 shots may have been found justified. I don't know that. Who knows how the court, how the DA would have looked at that, whether a grand jury would have brought charges. Who knows how that would have played out. But it's a possibility. But there's no possibility that he wouldn't get 3 attempted murder charges for shooting at a fleeing vehicle that represented 0 threat to him at that point. So this is another case where the use of force went on too long. And interestingly, there was a pause in the action. We see that real often in these cases. There's a pause in the action. Apparently, there was a pause in the action in the Tony McBride shooting. The final 2 shots came after a slight pause. We see it again here in the Michael Dunn shooting, where there's a 6-second pause in the action. We did not see a pause in the Jason Van Dyke shooting. That was 16 shots, shoot till the gun is empty, shoot very slowly, taking your time, shooting. You got all the time in the world to see that he's not a threat, and yet I keep shooting. That's a use of force that went too long. These other 2 cases were too much use of force in that there was a break in action and then we started the use of force again when the other person was no longer a threat to us. So those are the cases. That's how it was reported, and the end result, absolutely not what I want. You cannot use force when the other person does not represent a threat to you. And the amount of force you use has to be proportional to the threat they represent to you. So if a guy comes up and puts up his fists, I cannot, even though he's an imminent threat about to hurt me, I cannot draw a gun on him because he's my size, we're equal. The courts have held that fists don't represent lethal force, and my firearm represents a lethal use of force against him. So if he came up and he had a baseball bat, well, you can kill somebody with 1 blow with a baseball bat. So it would be proportional, it would be appropriate for me to draw a firearm in response to a baseball bat. So my use of force has to be proportionally correct. They represent lethal force, I can use lethal force. They represent force, but not lethal. There's no way they're going to kill me. They might hurt me, but it's force, but it's not lethal force. I can only respond with non-lethal force. That might be a good reason to have something like pepper spray or some other thing that's designed not to kill. So I can only use force when someone's about to kill me, and for lethal force. And I can only use force that's proportional. So that's an important consideration. Another thing we want to look at is We're using force, and it appears to the uneducated that it looks like we shot too long because we shot them in the back. Well, we should never shoot anyone in the back, because if you shot them in the back, they were fleeing and they were not a threat to you. So, and of course, there's always exceptions. So let's look at the shot in the back issue. If I'm shooting and I go bang, 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 and my last 2 shots enter them in the back, well, what may have happened is a time delay. When I'm shooting, when I've made the decision to shoot, it takes 1/4 of a second for the signal from my brain to the trigger finger to tell my finger to start squeezing the trigger. And as I'm shooting and I'm seeing what's happening, it takes 1/4 of a second for the sight. They drop the gun, they're no longer a threat. It takes 1/4 of a second for me to recognize. From my eyes to my brain, it takes 1/4 of a second to see that information. Then my brain has to assess that information, which is probably another 1/4 of a second. Then my brain has to send a signal to my trigger finger, stop shooting, idiot. And so then I get to stop shooting finally at a point of perhaps 3/4 of a second. So there's a delay between the time that the guy actually drops the gun and the time that I can get my finger stopped. Like, it's not instantaneous. The moment I see it, I can't stop my finger. There's a delay there. And that delay can be 2 full trigger cycles. So it's been shown many times in court, it's very articulatable that I could shoot somebody in the back 2 times and have properly stopped shooting as the threat disappeared. Another issue is the fact that the bad guy, the lethal threat to me, may be a lethal threat as he's doing this. And so shots in the back, we can't just say, well, he was shot in the back, so obviously that's an improper use of force. We cannot say that. That would be wildly inappropriate without taking into consideration these specific circumstances. So that is something we need to consider. We need to consider that we need to really focus on making decisions to stop using force. It's kind of like the Goldilocks principle that we hear about. Well, first of all, if we use too little force or we use it too late, we're going to have a negative outcome. We're the ones going to be hurt or killed. So we have to use the appropriate amount of force that will stop the threat, and we have to use it to the right length of time, and we have to stop at that point. So this is something that we ought to give a lot of thought to, that we need to be working on, not just our ability to get the gun out and get shots quickly. We need to be good at getting started in using force to defend our lives. But what's more important, in my mind, is being very good at stopping the use of force at the appropriate time. Because, quite frankly, fire too long, get convicted of murder, go to prison for 15 years, that's not a win. That's not good. We need to give serious consideration to this. I'll have more information about maybe the turning that coming later in another video. Thank you very much for paying attention and for giving us your time.